The air in Portland, Oregon, carried the scent of rain-soaked earth on the evening of October 14th, 2019. It was the kind of autumn night where fog clung to the streets like a living thing, swallowing lampposts whole and turning familiar neighborhoods into labyrinths of shadow. The temperature had dropped to 43 degrees, and a persistent drizzle painted the sidewalks black and reflective. In the Pearl District, where renovated warehouses stood shoulder to shoulder with trendy coffee shops, 26-year-old Maya Chen was closing up the small bookstore where she worked 6 days a week. Maya had moved to Portland 3 years earlier, drawn by the promise of creative community and the city's reputation for embracing outsiders. She had found both. Her studio apartment overlooked Northwest Everett Street, a cramped but cozy space filled with second-hand furniture and walls covered in her own watercolor paintings. Friends described her as methodical, punctual, someone who texted when she was running 5 minutes late. She had a routine that rarely varied: work until 9 at night, walk the 12 blocks home, call her younger sister in San Francisco before bed. That was Maya, predictable in the way that made her disappearance so profoundly wrong. Security footage from the bookstore captured Maya locking the front door at 9:03 in the evening. She was wearing a dark green rain jacket, jeans, and her signature canvas sneakers. Her backpack, a faded burgundy color she had owned since college, hung from her left shoulder. She turned right onto Northwest 10th Avenue, heading north toward her apartment. The camera at the corner store on Gleason Street caught her passing at 9:11. She was alone, walking at her normal pace. Nothing suggested distress. Nothing suggested she knew these would be her last recorded steps. Maya never arrived home. Her sister, Emily, called her at 10:40 that night, their usual time. No answer. She tried again at 11, then midnight. By 1 in the morning, Emily was calling Maya's roommate, a graphic designer named Tess, who confirmed that Maya had not returned. The two women filed a missing person report at 3:17 in the morning, unable to wait for the arbitrary 24-hour window that so often delays these investigations. The police, to their credit, took it seriously. Maya was not the type to disappear. The investigation moved quickly at first. Officers canvassed the 12-block route between the bookstore and Maya's apartment. They found nothing, no witnesses, no signs of struggle. Her cell phone, which she always carried, last pinged a tower near Northwest 11th and Marshall at 9:15. Then it went dark. Not powered off, according to the carrier. The signal simply stopped, as if the device had been destroyed or placed somewhere that blocked all transmission. Her bank account showed no activity after a coffee purchase at 2 in the afternoon that day. Her social media, which she checked compulsively, went silent. Maya Chen had walked into the rain-slicked streets of Portland and ceased to exist. What made investigators uneasy was not just the absence of evidence, but the presence of contradictions. 3 days after Maya vanished, a jogger found her backpack in Waterfront Park, 2 miles from her last known location. The bag was soaking wet, sitting on a bench overlooking the Willamette River. Inside, everything was intact. Her wallet with $67 in cash, her keys, her employee ID badge, even her phone, which no longer functioned. The battery had been removed and the SIM card destroyed, done with precision that suggested intent rather than random violence. But here was the unsettling detail that kept detectives awake. The backpack showed no signs of wear from being outdoors for 3 days. No mud, no debris. It looked as though it had been placed there recently, perhaps that very morning. Maya's family arrived from California, their faces drawn with sleepless nights and desperate hope. They organized search parties that combed every inch of the Pearl District, Forest Park, and the riverfront. They created social media campaigns that spread across the Pacific Northwest. Her sister Emily gave tearful interviews to local news stations, begging for any information. Maya's co-workers at the bookstore printed thousands of flyers. The owner of the corner store on Gleason played and replayed his security footage, trying to spot something, anything, that might explain where she went after passing his camera. But the city, usually so eager to share its secrets through surveillance and smartphones, offered nothing. Portland had swallowed Maya Chen whole. Months turned into seasons. The investigation stalled. Detectives pursued every lead, from the plausible to the paranoid. They interviewed ex-boyfriends, casual acquaintances, even strangers who had left comments on her social media posts. Everyone had alibis. Everyone expressed genuine shock. Maya had no enemies, no debts, no secrets that anyone knew of. She was, by all accounts, simply a young woman trying to make a life in a city she loved. The case file grew thick with dead ends. And then, 1 year and 3 months after her disappearance, something happened that transformed confusion into dread. A hiker discovered a journal in Forest Park, wedged between rocks near the Wildwood Trail. The journal was Maya's, her name written in her distinctive handwriting on the inside cover. The entries were mundane at first, documenting her daily life, her thoughts about work, sketches of book covers she admired. But the final entry, dated October 13th, the day before she vanished, was different. It was written in jagged, hurried script that barely resembled her usual careful penmanship. The words were cryptic. "Someone has been following me for 3 days. Same jacket, same walk, always 1 block behind. I see him in reflections. I tried to tell myself I was being paranoid. But tonight he was standing across from the bookstore, just standing there, watching. I do not know what to do." The entry ended there. No resolution, no plan. Just fear captured on paper and left in the woods like a message in a bottle. A message that arrived too late. Austin, Texas in the summer is an assault on the senses. The heat presses down like a physical weight, turning asphalt soft and making the horizon shimmer with mirages. On July 27th, 2021, the temperature climbed to 103 degrees by early afternoon, the kind of heat that empties streets and drives people into air-conditioned sanctuaries. But Marcus Webb was not bothered by heat. The 34-year-old software engineer had lived in Texas his entire life. He was lean and weathered, with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly what he wanted from life. What he wanted that day was to go for a run. Marcus lived alone in a modest house in the Bolden Creek neighborhood, a trendy area just south of Lady Bird Lake. His home was orderly to the point of being austere, everything in its place, bills paid automatically, groceries delivered on schedule. He worked remotely for a tech company based in California, which meant his days were structured around code and video calls. Friends said he was intensely private but dependable. If he committed to something, he followed through. Every Sunday at 3 in the afternoon, Marcus ran the trail around Lady Bird Lake. 10 miles, no matter the weather. He had done this for 4 years, without missing a single week. July 27th was a Sunday. He left his house at 2:53, captured by his own doorbell camera. He wore a light blue running shirt, black shorts, and wireless earbuds. His fitness watch, a device that tracked every heartbeat and mile, was secured to his left wrist. Marcus locked his door and stretched briefly on the front porch before jogging toward the lake trail. Neighbors would later say they saw him that afternoon, waving as he passed. One woman, walking her dog, remembered thinking he looked focused, as always. His expression was calm. There was no indication that anything was wrong. Marcus reached the trail at 3:07 and started his run clockwise around the lake, the path he always took. The trail around Lady Bird Lake is popular, especially on weekends. Even in brutal heat, runners and cyclists share the path, seeking relief in the shade of oak trees and the sight of water. Marcus passed several people during the first 3 miles. A cyclist remembered seeing him near the Lamar Boulevard Bridge. A group of tourists recalled a man matching his description running past them near the pedestrian bridge. His fitness watch recorded every step, every fluctuation in heart rate. At 3:42, 4.6 miles into his run, the data stopped. Not gradually, as if he had slowed to a walk, not erratically, as if he had collapsed. The watch simply ceased recording, mid-stride, as though Marcus Webb had been erased from existence. When Marcus did not return home by evening, no one was immediately concerned. He sometimes extended his runs or stopped for water, but by 10 at night, when he failed to respond to work messages, a colleague who knew his habits called the police. Officers were dispatched to his home. The door was locked. The house was empty. His car sat in the driveway. Everything looked normal except for the fact that Marcus was not there. The police, familiar with cases of runners having medical emergencies or getting disoriented in heat, organized a search of the trail at first light. What they found made no sense. At mile marker 4.6, where Marcus's fitness watch had stopped transmitting, searchers discovered his earbuds. They were lying in the center of the trail, side by side, as if carefully placed there, not dropped, not scattered, positioned with unnerving precision. 20 feet away, they found his running shoes, both of them untied and empty, sitting upright in the grass just off the path. Marcus's phone was discovered 50 feet further, resting on a bench overlooking the water. The screen was cracked, but the device still functioned. The last thing he had done was pause his music at 3:42, the exact moment his watch went silent. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no torn fabric, no witnesses who saw anything unusual. Marcus Webb had simply stepped out of his shoes and vanished. The search expanded. Helicopters scanned the lake and surrounding areas. Dive teams combed the water for any sign of a body. Volunteers walked every inch of the trail and adjacent parks. The Austin Police Department conducted hundreds of interviews. Marcus's colleagues confirmed he had no known conflicts, no debts, no personal crises. His bank records showed no unusual activity. His social media was sparse and unremarkable. He had no romantic entanglements, no estranged family members, no connections to criminal activity. Marcus Webb was, by every measurable standard, a man whose life was defined by routine and stability. People like that do not simply remove their shoes and walk into oblivion. Theories emerged and were dismissed. Perhaps Marcus had staged his own disappearance, though no one could explain why a man with no debts and no enemies would do so. Perhaps he had suffered a mental health crisis, though he had no history of such issues, and his recent communications showed no distress. Perhaps he had been the victim of a crime so perfectly executed that it left no evidence, though the precise placement of his belongings suggested he had removed them himself. Every explanation felt insufficient. The case became a fixture in local news, then national media. Podcasts dissected every detail. Amateur detectives offered wild theories online. But no amount of attention brought Marcus home. 6 months after his disappearance, police received an anonymous tip. A voice, distorted beyond recognition, told them to check Marcus's cloud storage account. Investigators obtained a warrant and accessed the account. What they found was a video file uploaded on July 27th at 3:39 in the afternoon, 3 minutes before Marcus's watch stopped recording. The video was shaky, filmed on his phone as he ran. It showed the trail ahead, trees and lake water, nothing unusual. Then, in the final seconds, Marcus turned the camera toward his own face. His expression was one of pure, inexplicable terror. His mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came. The video ended abruptly. The file metadata showed it had been uploaded automatically, a feature Marcus had enabled weeks earlier without realizing it. Whatever Marcus Webb saw in those final moments, whatever caused that look of absolute horror, he took it with him into the void. The city of New Orleans exists in a state of controlled chaos. It is a place where history and decay intertwine, where every street corner holds stories, both beautiful and terrible. The French Quarter, with its wrought-iron balconies and gas lamps, draws millions of visitors each year, all seeking something they cannot name. But those who live there know the truth. The Quarter never sleeps, but it is not always welcoming. On the night of March 9th, 2023, a cold front had pushed through Louisiana, dropping temperatures into the low 40s. Rain fell in sheets, turning Bourbon Street into a river of neon reflections and sending even the most dedicated revelers indoors. Isabel Moreau was a bartender at a cocktail lounge on Royal Street, a quieter, more refined part of the Quarter. At 29 years old, She had lived in New Orleans for 6 years, drawn by the music and the sense that the city operated by its own rules. Isabel was striking, with long dark hair and a self-assured demeanor that made her popular among regulars. She was also careful. She never walked alone late at night if she could help it, always kept her phone charged, always told friends when she was leaving work. New Orleans was beautiful, but it was not safe, and Isabel knew the difference between confidence and recklessness. Her shift ended at 2 in the morning on March 10th. She lived 8 blocks away in a converted Creole cottage on Dumaine Street. The bar's security camera showed Isabel leaving through the side door at 2:12. She was wearing a black leather jacket over her work clothes, carrying a small purse and holding her phone in her right hand. She turned left onto Royal Street and walked north. A camera at a hotel 2 blocks away captured her at 2:16, still alone, moving at a steady pace. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, and the streets were mostly empty. A few tourists stumbled past in the distance. A delivery truck idled at the corner. Everything looked ordinary. Isabel crossed Dumaine Street at 2:19, less than a block from her home. That was the last time anyone saw her. When Isabel failed to show up for brunch with her roommate at noon the next day, concern was immediate. Isabel never missed plans without calling. Her roommate, a teacher named Alyssa, went to Isabel's bedroom and found it untouched. The bed was still made from the previous morning. Her cat, a grey tabby named Miles, was crying for food. Alyssa called Isabel's phone repeatedly, each time reaching voicemail. By 2 in the afternoon, Alyssa was at the New Orleans Police Department, filing a missing person report. The officer who took the report was skeptical at first. Young women in the French Quarter sometimes stayed out all night. But when Alyssa explained Isabel's habits, showed the unanswered calls, described how responsible and consistent she was, the officer's expression changed. This was not a case of someone sleeping off a hangover. Detectives reviewed the security footage and traced Isabel's route. They walked it themselves, looking for blind spots, places where something could have happened without being recorded. They found nothing. The final stretch of Dumaine Street had no cameras, a gap in surveillance that now felt ominous. Officers knocked on every door, interviewed residents, asked if anyone had heard or seen anything unusual that night. Most people had been asleep. One elderly man recalled hearing what sounded like a car door slamming around 2:30 in the morning, but he could not say where it had come from or what kind of vehicle it might have been. Another resident mentioned seeing a dark sedan parked near the intersection earlier that evening, though he could not describe it in detail and admitted it might not have been there at 2 in the morning. The leads were thin and grew thinner. Isabel's phone was tracked to a cell tower that covered her neighborhood, but the signal went dead at 2:21. Her bank account showed no activity. Her social media had not been updated. Friends and co-workers described her as level-headed and happy, with no reason to disappear. She had no significant romantic relationships, no financial troubles, no conflicts with anyone. The manager at the bar where she worked wept during his interview, saying Isabel was one of the most reliable employees he had ever had. Her mother flew in from Baton Rouge, her face etched with the kind of anguish that comes from not knowing. Search parties combed the French Quarter, volunteers distributing flyers with Isabel's photograph. The police department issued alerts and contacted agencies across the state. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Isabel Moreau had walked into the rain-soaked night and disappeared as completely as if she had never existed. 3 months after her disappearance, a breakthrough arrived in the form of a horror. A fisherman found a purse floating in the Mississippi River, snagged on debris near the Algiers Point ferry dock. The purse was identified as Isabel's. Inside, her ID, credit cards, and phone were intact. The phone no longer functioned, waterlogged beyond repair, but forensic analysts were able to extract data from its memory. What they found was a series of text messages sent between 2:19 and 2:21 on the night she vanished. The messages were sent to a number that did not exist, a string of digits that could not be traced to any carrier or device. The content of the messages was chilling. The first message, sent at 2:19. Why are you following me? The second, at 2:20, I see you. Stay away from me. The third, at 2:21, please somebody help me. The final message, sent at 2:21 and 15 seconds, he is. And then nothing. No more messages, no calls. The phone went dark. Analysts determined that the messages had been sent deliberately, not auto-generated or corrupted by water damage. Isabel had typed them in her final conscious moments, trying to reach someone, anyone, but the recipient did not exist. The number led nowhere. It was as if she had been texting the void, screaming into silence. The investigation remains open. Detectives continue to chase leads that evaporate like morning mist over the river. Isabel's mother still lives in Baton Rouge. Her phone always charged, always within reach, waiting for a call that may never come. The bar on Royal Street has a photograph of Isabel behind the counter, a memorial to a woman who simply walked home and never arrived. Tourists pass the corner of Royal and Dumaine every day, laughing and taking selfies, unaware that this intersection holds a question no one can answer. Somewhere between 2:19 and 2:21 on the morning of March 10th, 2023, Isabel Monroe ceased to be. And whatever took her left nothing behind but a purse in the river and messages sent to a number that does not exist. The three disappearances, separated by geography and time, should have been unrelated. Maya Chen in Portland, Marcus Webb in Austin, Isabel Monroe in New Orleans, different cities, different years, different circumstances. But investigators who studied all three cases began to notice patterns that defied coincidence. Each victim vanished within blocks of their home, in areas they knew intimately. Each had been careful, responsible, the kind of person who does not take unnecessary risks. And each left behind evidence that suggested awareness of danger in their final moments. Maya's journal entry about being followed, Marcus's expression of terror on video, Isabel's frantic text messages. These were not people who stumbled into misfortune. They saw it coming and could not escape. In 2024, a retired FBI profiler named Dr. Thomas Keller was reviewing cold cases as part of a consulting project. He came across Maya Chen's file and was struck by the details. The backpack appearing days later, meticulously preserved. The destroyed phone. The journal entry. He requested files on similar cases and found Marcus Webb and Isabel Monroe. Dr. Keller had spent 30 years studying patterns in violent crime, and what he saw in these three cases made him profoundly uneasy. He contacted the Portland Police Department and requested a meeting. What he told them would shift the investigation in a direction no one had anticipated. Dr. Keller believed the disappearances were connected, not by a single perpetrator, but by method. He theorized that the victims had been surveilled extensively before vanishing, that someone had learned their routines, their habits, their vulnerabilities. The precision with which each person was taken suggested planning and patience. The lack of physical evidence indicated sophistication, but what disturbed Dr. Keller most was the psychological dimension. In each case, the victim had become aware they were being watched or followed shortly before disappearing. This was not typical of predatory crime, where stealth is paramount. It was as if the victims were meant to know, as if their fear was part of the design. The Portland detectives were skeptical at first, but they agreed to share information with their counterparts in Austin and New Orleans. A task force was quietly formed, operating outside official channels to avoid media attention. Investigators began comparing every detail. They looked for overlaps in travel history, social media connections, financial transactions. They found nothing. Maya, Marcus, and Isabel had never met, never visited the same places, never interacted online. Their lives were entirely separate, yet the similarities in their disappearances persisted. Each had vanished during a routine activity. Each had left behind belongings that were later discovered in strange locations or conditions. Each had expressed fear or awareness of danger just before going missing. The odds of this being coincidental were astronomically low. The task force expanded its search to other unsolved disappearances across the United States. They found 17 additional cases over the past decade that shared similar characteristics. Young adults, urban environments, no prior history of risky behavior, evidence of surveillance or stalking in the days before vanishing. The cases spanned Seattle, Denver, Chicago, Philadelphia, and Atlanta. None of the victims had been found. In several cases, personal items had been discovered weeks or months later in locations far from where the person was last seen. The task force compiled a database looking for geographic patterns, temporal clusters, anything that might reveal a connection. What emerged was not a pattern, but an absence of pattern. The disappearances seemed random, scattered across years and cities, united only by their eerie similarities. Dr. Keller proposed a theory that some investigators found difficult to accept. He suggested that the disappearances might be the work of multiple individuals operating independently, but using similar methods, perhaps sharing information through dark web forums or encrypted networks. This would explain the lack of geographic or temporal pattern. It would also explain why no single suspect had emerged despite extensive investigations. The idea that there could be a community of people facilitating these vanishings, sharing techniques, and evading detection was almost too disturbing to contemplate. But Dr. Keller pointed to the precision of each case, the lack of mistakes, the complete absence of forensic evidence. This level of competence, he argued, suggested training or coordination. The investigation took a darker turn when cyber analysts discovered something buried in the metadata of Marcus Webb's uploaded video. The file had been routed through multiple servers before reaching his cloud account, a level of digital obfuscation that Marcus, a software engineer, might have implemented if he suspected his devices were compromised. But the routing also suggested that someone else had accessed the file during its upload, copying it to an unknown destination. The analysts traced the route as far as they could, hitting dead ends in countries with no extradition treaties and servers owned by shell corporations. Whoever had intercepted Marcus's final video knew what they were doing. They had watched him record his terror and had taken a copy for themselves. Families of the missing began connecting with one another, forming support groups that evolved into advocacy organizations. Maya's sister Emily, Marcus's colleagues, Isabel's mother, all of them channeled their grief into action. They lobbied for legislative changes to improve how law enforcement handles missing person cases. They funded private investigators and hired forensic experts. They refused to let the cases grow cold. Media coverage intensified. Podcasts dedicated entire seasons to the unsettling disappearances. Online communities dissected every detail, generating theories that ranged from plausible to paranoid. Some believed the victims were alive, held somewhere against their will. Others thought the cases were connected to human trafficking networks. A few suggested explanations that defied logic, conspiracies involving government experiments or supernatural forces. The truth, elusive and terrible, remained out of reach. As the task force continued its work, one fact became unavoidable. The disappearances were not slowing down. New cases emerged every few months, each one bearing the same hallmarks. Someone, or something, was taking people with ruthless efficiency, leaving behind just enough evidence to torment those who remained. The cases were open wounds, never healing, always aching. And for every family waiting for answers, the question persisted. If Maya and Marcus and Isabel could vanish so completely, what stops it from happening to anyone? What stops it from happening to you? The rain returned to Portland on October 14th, 2024, exactly 5 years after Maya Chen walked into the fog and never came home. Emily, Maya's sister, stood on the corner of Northwest 11th and Marshall, the place where Maya's phone had last transmitted a signal. Emily had moved to Portland 2 years earlier, unable to stay in San Francisco while her sister's case remained unsolved. She had dedicated her life to finding answers, working with the task force, connecting with other families, refusing to let Maya become just another statistic. The rain was cold against her face, but she did not move. She stood there, as she did every year on this date, trying to understand what had happened in this exact spot. Around the country, others were engaged in similar rituals. In Austin, Marcus Webb's brother ran the trail around Lady Bird Lake, retracing the route Marcus had taken on his final day. He did this every month, wearing one of Marcus's old running shirts, headphones playing the same music Marcus had listened to. It was a way of staying connected, of refusing to accept that his brother was simply gone. In New Orleans, Isabel Moreau's mother lit a candle in St. Louis Cathedral, as she had done every week since her daughter's disappearance. She prayed not for miracles, but for closure, for the strength to endure one more day without answers. The families had become experts in grief, navigating a landscape where hope and despair existed in equal measure. Dr. Keller continued his work, now consulting full-time on the connected cases. He had become obsessed, driven by the belief that solving one disappearance would unlock the others. He spent his days reviewing files, his nights lying awake, turning over details in his mind. He had developed a theory, one he had not yet shared with the task force because it sounded too much like paranoia. He believed the vanishings were not random crimes of opportunity, but selections, that the victims were chosen for specific reasons, perhaps characteristics or behaviors that made them vulnerable in ways no one could predict. The lack of connection between victims was itself a connection, a deliberate strategy to avoid detection. Whoever was behind this understood that patterns could be traced, so they created an absence of pattern. In late November of 2024, the task force received a package. It arrived at the Portland Police Department, addressed to no one in particular, with no return address. Inside was a USB drive. The contents of the drive were encrypted, requiring days of work by cyber analysts to access. When they finally broke through, what they found was a collection of photographs, hundreds of them, candid shots of people in cities across the United States, individuals going about their daily lives, walking to work, buying coffee, waiting at bus stops. None of the photographs were dated, and many of the people in them could not be identified. But among the images, investigators found photographs of Maya Chen, Marcus Webb, and Isabel Moreau, all taken in the weeks before they disappeared. The photographs were chilling in their mundanity. Maya outside the bookstore, Marcus stretching before a run, Isabel leaving her apartment. The images captured moments that should have been private, routine, forgettable, but they had been observed, documented, preserved. The task force realized they were looking at evidence of extensive surveillance, proof that the victims had been watched long before they vanished. But the photographs raised more questions than they answered. Who had taken them? Why send them now, years after some of the disappearances? And most disturbingly, were the other people in the photographs also targets? The task force began the painstaking process of trying to identify everyone in the images, a task that would take months and might ultimately prove impossible. Emily received a call from the Portland Police Department in early December. They asked her to come in, said they had something to show her. She sat in a conference room, her hands trembling, as a detective placed a photograph in front of her. It was Maya, standing on the corner where Emily now stood every October 14th. The photograph had been taken at night, in the rain, on October 14th, 2019. Maya was looking directly at the camera, her expression one of confusion and fear. She knew she was being photographed. She knew she was being watched. The detective explained that this image had been on the USB drive. Emily stared at her sister's face, frozen in that moment of terrible awareness, and felt something break inside her. Maya had been afraid. She had known, and no one had been able to help her. The media seized on the USB drive story, and public attention surged. Tips flooded in from across the country. Some were credible, others were not. The task force followed every lead, knowing that even the most unlikely tip might contain the key to solving the cases. But as weeks passed, the initial surge of hope began to fade. The photographs, while disturbing, did not point to a specific individual or organization. The encryption used on the drive was sophisticated but not unique. The package itself had been mailed from a post office in a city where none of the victims had lived, dropped in a blue mailbox that was checked daily by postal workers who remembered nothing unusual. The sender had been careful, as always. Dr. Keller made a public statement, something he rarely did. He appeared on national television and addressed whoever had sent the photographs directly. He said that the cases would not be forgotten, that investigators would not stop searching, that the families deserved answers. He spoke calmly, but his words carried an edge of desperation. He knew, as did everyone involved in the investigation, that time was not on their side. With each passing year, evidence degraded, memories faded, witnesses moved away or lost interest. Cold cases were called cold for a reason. They grew harder to solve, not easier. And yet, Dr. Keller refused to believe these cases were unsolvable. Somewhere, someone knew what had happened to Maya and Marcus and Isabel. Someone had answers. The question was whether they would ever come forward. As 2025 began, the families continued their rituals of remembrance. They gathered at vigils, shared stories, supported one another through the darkest moments. They had become a community bound by loss and by the refusal to give up. Emily stood on that Portland street corner every October 14th, rain or shine. Marcus's brother ran the Austin Trail every month, pushing through heat and exhaustion. Isabel's mother lit her candles, said her prayers, and waited. They lived in a state of suspension, unable to move forward but refusing to retreat. And somewhere, in cities they might never visit, others were being watched, photographed, selected. The disappearances continued, each one adding to the toll, each one leaving behind families who would spend the rest of their lives asking the same question. Where did they go? The answer, if it exists, remains hidden in the shadows. And the shadows are growing longer. Some people do not just disappear, they are taken. And until we understand how and by whom, no one is truly safe.